humans. Hello, humans. Hello, humans. It's me, Ellie Krug, Ellie 2.0 Radio. Happy New Year. Happy 2023. Oh, my God. And you know what? Not only is this our first show of 2023, but we are now entering, if you can believe it, entering the sixth, like number sixth year of this show. And heading eventually sometime this year to episode 300. Wow. You know, and again, my hat is off to Chad Larson, the station owner, because trust me, this show, I don't know how much we're paying the bills, if any, okay? And so he's been very kind to me to let me be on this show. And if you're new to the show, okay, since it's the beginning of the year, we should probably say this. I'm Ellie Krug, an idealist for most of my life. And this show that you're listening to right now is about idealism and idealists, both historical and present day. This is people, idealists, working to make the world better, seeking for positive change. That's what this show is all about. And we have a great show to start off the new year. The big interview is with Greg Anderson, the curator of the podcast Living in Carver County, Minnesota, and someone I am sure that you will enjoy because he's got a wonderful, sparkling personality. And he's going to talk about getting out of one's personal protective bubble. So I think it'll be a great interview. And in my C block, I'm going to talk to you about my work as an idealist. But let us begin with this week's featured idealist, a name that really burst onto the national scene late last year when House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi announced that she was retiring from congressional leadership. I'm speaking of Hakeem Jeffries, who has assumed the reins of House Minority Leader in the wake of the Republicans' thin House majority. Literally, as I'm taping this show, they're battling it out about Kevin McCarthy. So who is Hakeem Jeffries, and how did he get elevated to lead the House Democrats? Well, to begin with, Jeffries is a lifelong New Yorker, born in New York City in August of 1970. That makes him 52 years old. His mother was a social worker, and his father was a substance abuse counselor. He attended public school and then went to Binghamton University in upstate New York. He then went on to Georgetown, where he earned a Master of Public Policy degree. But in a reflection of how personally driven Jeffries is, he then went on to law school, graduating from NYU Law. I mean, it's not a shabby law school. Graduating from there in 1997. Now, after spending a year clerking for a federal judge in New York's Southern District, so if you're going to clerk for a federal judge in America, you do it in the Southern District. Okay, I'm just telling you, because that's where a whole lot is happening. But after his clerkship, his trajectory seemed to be big law, okay? You know, he was hired by one of the largest law firms in the world, Paul Weiss, doing litigation and no doubt making a six-figure salary, okay? As a young man, making trust me, it probably would be in the vicinity of $200,000 a year just to start out as a lawyer at those days. After 6 years of working big law, okay, he then went on to become an in-house litigator for CBS and Viacom. I mean, you look at this guy's paper at that point, you're like, he's going to go and, maybe be general counsel for some company someday, going to be, making seven figures doing all that. He's on his way to do that. Look at that. And then along the way, while still with big law, okay, in the 2000s, Jeffries attempted to start a political career by running for the New York State Assembly. It's a seat that these are Democratic seats, so he had to go against the incumbent, and he lost twice. He tried to do this, try and get into the New York State House twice. He lost two Democratic primaries back to back. But in so he's tenacious. So what do we know about him already? First, we know he's well-educated. Secondly, we know that he's driven, okay? And third, we know that he's tenacious because after losing twice to try and get to the New York State House, in 2006, he won the primary and then the general. And then for 6 years, he served in the New York State Assembly, that's their legislature, where he introduced over 70 bills. So now let me add to this, the guy works hard and has an imagination, okay? And among those bills was a bill to protect children from hazardous toys. And then there was another bill to prevent police departments from collecting data on stop and frisk. So the police departments, what they were doing is they'd stop and frisk people, then they'd enter the names of the people that they stopped and frisked into a database in order to know maybe they should go stop and frisk them again. So he put an end, I think that bill passed to stop police departments from doing that. So 6 years in the state legislature, the assembly in New York, and in 2012, Jeffries ran for and was elected to represent New York's 8th congressional district. And that includes much of Brooklyn and parts of Queens and Coney Island. Certainly, he was a favorite in that race, building a coalition that included former New York Mayor Ed Koch, and where nearly half of the money that Jeffries raised for his first run in the House of Representatives, that would be the U.S., more than half the money he raised came from out of state. And so, hold on a second, I just lost a page in my notes. Well, that is not very good, Ellie. How did you do that? Okay, well, there we go. All right, so Jeffries, in addition to other things, okay, so he gets into Congress. Here we go, El. And back in 2012, originally elected to Congress, and he was reelected in 2014, 2016, and 2018, which included him gaining the role of chair of the House Democratic Caucus beginning in January of 2019. And as such, he was the 5th ranking member of Democratic leadership. Now, for me, Jeffries' name popped up onto my radar with the first impeachment trial of Donald Trump, when he was one of the 7 House managers, and I think he was the primary manager for the first impeachment case. And in terms of his legislative priorities, Jeffries is considered a centrist Democrat who will work with Republicans. Okay, he said he will do that. And he's on the House Judiciary Committee and Intellectual Property Subcommittee. He's a firm supporter of Israel, know that, okay? Which, we'll see where that goes. Also, following I'm anticipating that Israel's going to do some things that are going to not be really great for world peace, given the current Israeli leadership. All right, I diverted. That was a rabbit hole that I went down. Sorry. Okay, also, following the December 2014 chokehold death of Eric Gardner in Jeffries' congressional district, okay, Jeffries introduced a bill to make police chokeholds illegal under federal law. That did not pass. He also called on New York City police to reform its low-level marijuana arrest policies. And in June of 2015, after the white supremacist shootings at Emmanuel Baptist Church in Charleston, Jeffries led the effort to have the Confederate flag removed from sales or display at National Park Service's land. Now, did you hear what I just said? In National Park Service lands in 2015, and by the way, still, because Jeffries' efforts to get the Confederate flag banned didn't pass because Republicans did not agree to it. But on our parks lands, they're flying the Confederate flag. Finally, on a somewhat dear note to me and to my heart, Jeffries voted for the Equality Act, okay, to ban discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. Whew, see, hey, Jeffries is also married and has 2 children. Now, how is it that Jeffries succeeded Nancy Pelosi? Well, last summer, it became clear that Adam Schiff, the chair of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and who was also a House impeachment manager for Trump impeachment, I believe, number 2, that Schiff wanted to succeed Nancy Pelosi. And so the word was about that it was, Schiff wanted it, Hakeem Jeffries wanted it, but Jim Clyburn, who you may recall was President Biden's kingmaker in the 2020 South Carolina primary. By the way, without Jim Clyburn, we would not have a President Biden. I just want to let you know that, okay? Jim Clyburn happens to be Jeffries' mentor. Hakeem Jeffries' mentor is Jim Clyburn. And of course, so Jim Clyburn, I think, has a lot of significance and power. And of course, there was a historical significance of Hakeem Jeffries as the first black leader of the House of black leader of either party in the House, okay? And he's also, at 52, he's able to bridge differences between our octogenarians and our younger, Democratic colleagues. And so, he's in a perfect position to do things. That does not mean he's not the subject. As I was preparing this show just this morning, so we're taping it on Friday, I saw that Marjorie Taylor Greene launched a 30-second attack ad against Hakeem Jeffries. And you would know it, of course, because she does this. She just used his first name, Hakeem, throughout the attack ad. And you know why she did that, right? By the way, he's Baptist, not Muslim. All right, well, listen, I look forward to what more Hakeem Jeffries will bring to the fore in the years ahead. He is someone to watch. Maybe someday he'll be president. Who knows? Okay, there you go. Our featured idealist of the week. I hope you enjoyed that. I did. And he's a very important person in our political system right now, so it's all good to know more. All right, we're going to take a break. Then we're going to come back and do the big interview with Greg Anderson. You will love it. And then we'll do my C Block after that. If you like what you hear, visit my website at elliekrug.com. Follow me on Twitter at elliekrug. Email me at ellieJkrug@gmail.com. I love hearing from my listeners. We'll be back in a second. And we're back. Ellie 2.0 Radio with me, your lovely Ellie Krug. Okay, so Hakeem Jeffries, pay attention. We're going to be hearing that name a whole lot as we go forward. So, all right, now, time for the big interview. I am thrilled, absolutely thrilled to be able to present my friend and a colleague and supporter, Greg Anderson. Greg is a resident of Chaska, Minnesota, Carver County, eastern Carver County specifically. By day, he is a realtor, a very, very successful realtor and property investor. But by, much of what counts, he's an idealist. He is someone he is the curator of this wonderful podcast, Living in Carver County. Greg Anderson, welcome to Ellie 2.0 Radio. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you, Ellie, for such a nice introduction. I was wondering who you were talking about.
No. I'm thrilled to have you, Greg. And I have, and we should make sure that the audience understands. I've been on your podcast, about 2 years ago, Living in Carver County. And that's how you and I got to know each other. But since then, you're a Rotarian like I'm a Rotarian. You're civic-minded like I am. You help me strategize about my campaign for the school board, and I've gotten to know you and your wife and all that kind of stuff. So we're friends. But I've wanted to have you on the show because you are an idealist, even though maybe you don't label yourself that way, because you have created this podcast. Let's talk about the podcast first, okay? And then kind of segue into why you're doing it and how it comes about. Now, I'm going to shut up because I'm actually interviewing you and not me. And so tell us what Living in Carver County is all about.
Well, the podcast is basically interviews with people. It's a very niche audience. So for somebody listening in St. Paul, it might not be very relevant, but it's local elected officials. It's business people. It's people that are involved with nonprofits. One of I had the president of Dunwoody on, and who happens to live in Carver County, and we're talking about young people getting into the trades. We spent a lot of time talking with around foster care. What I've tried to do is look at situations. I don't think, for just as an example, Ellie, we had two interviews related to foster care. And I don't think anybody's going to really care what I think about Roe v. Wade, but there's inevitable consequence in a country where there's the general psyche is that people who don't want to become parents or ill-equipped to become parents have to become parents. Then there's an inevitable consequence to that, right? And so we spent time dealing with that. So we're trying to get on the solution side of things and awareness about issues and talk about things that won't fit on a meme or on a bumper sticker, because I think that's kind of an ineffective way to shape conversations.
Okay, so audience members, this is a familiar ringing that you're hearing in your ears right now because you just heard an idealist speak. Well, it's true. It's true. But Greg, let's talk. So thank you. I think it's a wonderful podcast, and I hope that it gets audience members, by all means, go and, Greg, tell them how they can get on the podcast. Is it through Spotify, Apple?
Anywhere. Apple, Google, Spotify. There actually is a website called the Living in Carver County podcast.com, and then it has a feed with all of the episodes.
Okay. All right. And we may come back to that in the interview, but what I want to do is really talk about the circuitous route that got you to doing what you're doing, because as you and I have talked, I mean, you grew up in Marshfield, Wisconsin, on a farm, and with a very strong Catholic upbringing, Catholic family. And then when, and this was in we're talking the 70s, right? No, yep, okay. And then you...
Late 70s, yeah.
And then you decided, when you turned 18, and you weren't happy with your dad, you decided that you were going to get in your car and drive to Dallas, Texas. Right? Am I right about that?
Yeah, no, you're right.
Okay, which, is not something a whole lot of 18-year-olds do, all right? And then you and I agreed that the theme of this talk will be about the bubble, okay? And the way that we shape our worlds according to things that we're only comfortable with and things that we know. You started to puncture that bubble when you were 18. Can you tell the audience, how did that happen? And how did your world start to expand?
Well, and I talked to a friend of mine lately, and in fact, she's the person who gave me your original contact information. And I said, there was a time in my life I was happy in unconscious incompetence. I was kind of blissful in my little bubble of not knowing, and not knowing that I didn't know. The town that I grew up in, there were 3 Catholic elementary schools, and just for diversity, there was a Lutheran school they threw in there. And so you talk about a bubble, and then moving, and I thought the world was the way that it was presented to me in that bubble.
Right.
And moving to Dallas was very eye-opening. I did a variety of jobs. I moved there with a few $100s in my pocket, a car that I had a loan on, and I needed to work. And one of the jobs that I got was a company that it was an exercise facility, but it was a company owned by a gay man. And so having, it was like having conversations. And at the time, it was, I recognized that I was more curious about things, and I would have conversations with them, and, they interpreted that interest as something else. And so I had to kind of get clear in my head. It's like, well, what does this mean? And so it just started to open up my world. And, knowing people always is, when you meet someone, it's a whole different thing. It takes then, but now it's Ellie's my friend, as opposed to, those people. And that I kind of grew up in that sort of a bubble where, there was always somebody else that was them, or, those people, or that kind of thing. And when you start engaging with people, you realize that everybody has kind of the same, basic human needs, right? The need to have certainty, the needs to have some variety, the need to, have significance, to have love.
Love and be loved. Loved and be loved, for sure. Yep.
Exactly. So that was a big part of it. Being in Dallas, I was young. I mean, I think I still had, I still had cow crap between my toes. I mean, I was about as green can be. And I met someone who had a profound impact on my life, and it was haphazard. I asked him where I was, and because I was calling for directions. This is before cell phones, and I was at a payphone calling for a job interview, and I tapped the guy next to me to ask where I was, and I could tell he thought I was a rube because he gave me his card and he said, just let me know you're okay. Give me a call in a couple weeks. And so we had a wonderful lifelong relationship. He passed away in 2018. Oddly enough, same year as my dad passed away. And I actually got to see him right before he died. I was back down in Dallas. And, but just that idea of leaning into people, that investment that people make in other people, that you have this obligation, I think, to pay it forward, to be that person for other people.
Well,
so,
no, and it's so it's so profound what you're saying, Greg, and yet we don't do this, okay? Because we're afraid of people that we don't know, and we're afraid of things that we don't understand. But so you had this experience in Dallas. You get to know, different people, but particularly gay people, and you get to understand the things that you assume growing up as a kid, what the Catholic Church may have been teaching you, or but the jokes you may have been hearing, as a teenager or whatever about gay people. You come to understand that actually they're real humans, right? And some of them care about you, not romantically, but on a platonic level, and you start to figure that out. But then you carry, as you're talking about carrying forward, you eventually end up back here in the Twin Cities, or in the Twin Cities. You get married, and then you start doing something which I think is incredible. You started hosting exchange students. Am I right about that?
Yeah, there's a big gap in there, but yeah, I moved back. Part of the thing about Dallas is that I was in over my head. And I don't want to belabor that too much, but I was in way over my head. I was an 18-year-old, 19-year-old guy right off the farm. I mean, green as green can be. And everyone that was in my world was in their late 30s, early 40s. This was pre-AIDS. This was, access to pharmaceuticals. There was a lot of things going on that I had to kind of recognize that if I stayed in that environment, and actually that was kind of how I framed it with my parents. And you mentioned my dad. We certainly reconciled many years ago, and it was just an unfortunate thing. But the conversation was that if I stay here in this environment, I don't think I'm going to like the person that I'm going to become in 10 or 15 years. And so I had that realization. So that was partly why I moved here. But yeah, and then I met my wife. I think I shared with you, I put a thing on, was 40 years ago on New Year's Eve that we had met, and got married, and so wanting to have these people in our life, students. And so we've hosted a dozen international students in our home over the years, which was really profound in terms of the impact it had on our family, the conversations around the dinner table, all of those things. It was wonderful. I can't recommend it enough.
But you also told me about having the exchange students, which I thought was just incredibly kind and compassionate, but understanding, was that you felt the need that when you had an exchange student at your dinner table to understand and remember, go ahead and say it, that at another table.
Yeah, I actually did talks to other Rotary clubs to encourage their members to host the students. And so one of the things that occurred to me one night is we're sitting at our dinner table and there's someone sitting at our table. And it changed our mindfulness around the conversations, because you think about the fact that there's someone sitting at my table, but somewhere on another part of the earth, there's a family sitting down to dinner with an empty chair. And so there was it felt like a responsibility to make this sacrifice that the family made by losing their child for a year, and the expense involved with that, and to make that count, to make that significant. And so it was a cool thing, and our kids got a tremendous benefit from it.
Sure. Yeah, well, it's about, again, exploring boundaries and understanding that there are different perspectives and all that stuff. But let's go back and talk about this bubble thing, okay? Because as you and I spoke off mic, it's the bubble that is keeping us as a country from moving forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This notion that, I mean, I exist, I got a pretty good genetic shake. I mean, looking at me, you would go, really? But, but maybe not. Let's not get too far out in front of our
Greg,
skis
you
there,
know
buddy.
I love bald men with goatees. I'm just telling you, okay, honey?
But, but, but to be born a white guy in the early 60s, historically, that's a pretty good hand to get dealt, right? And
Although
I
there are a
could,
lot of white guys that would disagree with that right now, but go on. Yep.
well,
But that's the bubble.
just
That's the
lack of-
bubble.
That's a
Yeah.
lack of awareness, because
Right.
the fact of the matter is, who would you trade places with?
Yeah.
You think about it from a historical standpoint. I wouldn't trade places with me from the early 1900s, because I really don't want to get diphtheria or polio or any of these things, right? So I mean, all in all, at a pretty good shake, and it'd be pretty easy for me to live my life and not be exposed to anyone that's really outside
Yeah.
of my little, heteronormal,
World, yeah.
white privileged existence. But that's not really how the world works. And the people that live there's this expression I think you and I've talked about. It's been around forever. It's born on third base, and every day you wake up and you think you hit a triple. And I think that's just such a lack of awareness. It's and having gone through some diversity and equity. I went through a diversity equity program through the University of Minnesota that was for all the volunteers that work at launch. I was one of the adulting mentors for homeless teens. And so there was a lot of diversity work and equity around that. And there's just so many people that just don't have a sense that, the idea that, okay, yeah, you work hard, for example. There's
Right.
a bunch of people in the Twin Cities in general. I don't want to pick on Carver County, but just in general, and say, well, I worked hard, and I this idea that it's complete meritocracy. And that's, the idea of equity doesn't say that you didn't work hard. It just says this other circumstance wasn't something you also had to overcome.
Right.
Your gender, your sexuality,
Yeah.
your race, your any physical limitations. Those, you didn't have to overcome those. That doesn't mean you didn't have to work. You just didn't have that other baggage to deal with. And the idea that that's outside people's awareness boggles me. It boggles my mind. And so I find I struggle with the idea of checking people and also being in a business where I need to maintain rapport with people, finding that kind of finesse that it's like, okay, I wasn't brought into their world to beat them over the head and try to bring them into the light. Right. And yet you, as a person who's had, I suggest significant privilege, I feel like there's an opportunity, there's an obligation to make have discussions about these things.
Well, it's about modeling for sure, right? And I mean, your podcast, I think, is an exercise in modeling. It just really, because it's very broad and by the way, I love the little write-ups you have on the podcast. It's so personal, the way that you write about what your interviewees said and who they are. I'm watching my time here a little bit, Greg, and so
Sure.
Let me ask you this, okay? This bubble thing. I mean, you and I, even long after this radio show, we're going to be talking about the bubble thing, and I'm sure that you and I will be collaborating to see how together we can work to talk about this in the public and help people to take risks, right? Because it's about taking risks to get outside the bubble, and then people are afraid to take those kinds of risks. But let me. Oh, go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say, there's the other challenge, the layer on there is this idea that somehow these privileges they have are bestowed on them by God, and that there's some kind of moral imperative to the messages that they're doing. That just adds a layer of complexity to that. And and that's what you and I've talked about, having a crisis of church as opposed to not. I mean, not. I don't have a crisis of faith. I do have a crisis of church, because there's these. You talk about a bubble, but then there's also these structural supports that make this, that go beyond just the idea that this is an okay opinion, but that this is actually, that there's a religious component that justifies that.
Yeah.
And,
So
and
a fabric over the bubble,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. The scaffolding, if you will.
So let me, and we'll come back and have that discussion, I'm sure,
Yeah.
many times.
Let's end on something light.
Well, so the question, hold on. Because it's not a given when you were growing up in Marshfield that you and I would ever be talking to each other. We've already, I think, established that with this interview. Nor was it a given that you'd be talking to the other people that are on your, that you have on your podcast, okay? And generally, I mean, I've seen you operate in public with, just humans, and you are very kind and warm and very welcoming to everybody. But what do you think it was that made you so willing to take risks, to get out of the bubble, to be idealistic? What was in your DNA? What was it, why'd you get to be the way that you are? Idealistically.
Examples. Yeah, that's the question, right? The examples of people that had grace, that bestowed grace on people that I had in my life. I mean, I was a bonehead. I said stuff that I'd be horribly embarrassed if it came out today. And people, over many years, and they were about different things. And people showed me grace. They showed me kindness, and they helped educate me. And it made me realize that, I think there's this goal of, I want to be better today than I was yesterday, but tomorrow I'm going to be better than I am today. And, I try to apply that to a variety, everything in my life, whether it's, around fitness or my relationship with my family or, clients or the business or whatever. I mean, because there's no staying still in anything in nature. You're either growing or you're dying. And I actually have T-shirts that have that on in Norwegian, by the way. But it just makes for more interesting conversations. But you're either growing or you're dying. And I just think that that relationship aspect, of how you engage with people is something that you can always be better at. So,
but
I don't know
again,
if that answers your question.
No,
but
it does. But the thing is, and is that you've learned, okay, and this word grace, I'm really thrilled that you're using it, because I don't think that we use that word nearly enough, along with the word dignity. We don't use the word dignity very often anymore. But again, you've been willing to do things where many of your cohorts have been unwilling to do it. And we just have to move as a society to have a whole lot more Greg Andersons out there, who are willing to talk about this publicly like we're doing right now, okay? Because people learn from this stuff. They're like, oh, it's okay that I do that. Or, okay, if he can do that, maybe I'm going to be willing to do that, kind of thing.
Do we have a second? I have something that I think ties in with that nicely.
Sure.
When you came to the Rotary Club, there was somebody, and we're not going to mention by name, but you said he was attempting to relitigate the Civil War, so we know who we're talking about. And this person had a significant breach of. He did something. He was involved with the group. I don't want to get too specific, but he did something that was a big breach. And when he got checked in the softest, most gentlest way by the person who would have the softest touch. And like a lot of people, it literally like white out of white fragility, right? Where when you get checked because you did something, of course you become the victim.
Right.
And it was just textbook, except here's the thing. He had the thought process that he realized he had made a mistake. He came back to the group, he apologized, and the group forgave him.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a valuable part of the group right up until he passed away. And that's something that I think is missing. And I think that's something that people are fearful of, is this idea that I'm going to make a mistake And they're so worried about making a mistake that they don't say anything. And there just has to be that forgiveness. And that's part of that educational process.
Absolutely. But that's also grace, and,
Absolutely.
you know,
Absolutely.
well, Greg, it's been a real pleasure and an honor to talk with you here. I hope that you've found it valuable. I don't think I'm nearly as good an interviewer as you are on your podcast, but, hey, there you go.
well, you got a bigger challenge today, trying to get a Luddite to speak.
Oh, stop it. Just stop it.
But this has been fun. I've enjoyed this very much. Thank you.
So have I. And thank you for being on Ellie 2.0 Radio. And I really appreciate all that you're doing for the world. Keep it up. Listeners, go check out Living in Carver County, the podcast with Greg Anderson. And you won't be sorry. You'll enjoy it. So, Greg, take care until I see you next time, okay?
All right, Ellie.
All right.
You're the best. Thank you.
Thanks so very much. All right, listeners. Well, there we go, the big interview. When I come back, we're going to do my C block. I'm going to talk to you about two things, about gratitude and about something else. Okay, we'll be back in a second. Ellie 2.0 Radio. If you like what you hear, visit my website at elliekrug.com. And we're back, Ellie 2.0 Radio. I hope you enjoyed that interview of my friend Greg Anderson. He is a really, really decent person. Check out Living in Carver County podcast. You will enjoy it. Okay, C block, my work. Two things I want to talk about very quickly. I don't have that much time. First, over the holidays, I took a 3,000-mile, 8-day car drive to southern Utah and back. Let me just tell you, it was what my soul needed greatly. Jack, by the way, my dog, he had to go into the kennel, which I don't think I'm going to do that again for such a long time. But and seeing America change from the forests and the lakes of Minnesota to the farmland of Iowa, the flatness and boringness of Nebraska, yes. But then you get into eastern Colorado and then it starts to change again. You see the mountains and then you're in the mountains, then you go down out of the mountains and then you go back to sort of flatland and then you get into the granite mountains and the sandstone rocks and all that stuff of Utah. Stunning. And one of the reasons I wanted to take that trip is I needed to be with myself for a while. I just, I've talked about this school campaign to get on the school board. It took a lot out of me between August and November, a whole lot. And it was good to be in the car. And one of the things I did in the car is I turned off the radio for 200 miles and I talked to myself. I needed to do that because I hadn't been talking to myself. And one of the things that I ended up concluding is that I need to live my life with more gratitude than what I've been doing. Gratitude as in, hey, you just woke up. Congratulations. I just had my 66th birthday. Let me tell you, okay? That's something to be happy about that you woke up. And Jack, my dog, I've changed the whole way I view that little boy. And I've concluded he is my family now. And yep. So anyway, all right. Second thing I wanted to talk with you about is, I did run for the school board. It was a hotly contested election. There were 12 candidates vying for 4 seats. I came in number 3, so I got on. But there was a slate of 4, the conservative candidates, the ones that wanted to end, teaching about diversity, equity, and inclusion, the one that's like, we're not going to give any special treatment or protection for LGBTQ students, that group of people. There were 4 of them that ran as a block, and one of them got elected. So he came in number 4 out of the 4 seats that were open. So he followed me. And I will tell, and I've gotten to know him. He is a decent guy, okay? We right before Thanksgiving, we sat and had lunch, even celebratory drinks at lunch. Yes, we did that. And we talked about how we actually like each other and how we think each other is decent. And he's getting the same comments I'm getting, which is how can you be her friend? Okay, because of what I stand for. And what I keep hearing in the time since the election, and by the way, I get sworn in on Monday, the 9th, okay? But what I keep hearing is we're thrilled about 3 of the 4. And you know what I'm doing? Your idealistic friend here, your idealistic radio host, you know what I'm saying? Hold on a second. Don't do that. I'm saying the 4th is a decent guy, okay? Give him a chance, okay? I don't think that he's going to be throwing, bombs. And he and I have talked about maybe there's a possibility that we can model about getting past, the divide. We'll see. I mean, time will show. But I am your idealistic radio host here. Every time somebody says, I like 3 but the 4, every time I'm like, hold on. Don't do that. And you know what, listeners? We all need to do that. We need to give people chances. We need to stop the labeling. We need to stop the grouping. We need to stop, oh my God. And we just need to approach and let everybody show up as humans. Now, yeah, we're going to have differences, and yeah, there'll be, but that's part of the democracy in the world. It's the demonizing, which is the horror. Because it's the demonizing. We just got done talking to Greg Anderson about the bubble. It's the demonizing that prevents us from moving forward. And boy, do we need to move forward. And if there's any other reason, you can't come up, well, why should we move forward? We need to move forward for the kids because we've got to give them a country. We've got to have a country for them to grow up in. We do. I know that sounds really dramatic. But you know what? Look at what's going on right now. The House of Representatives, some of the things that you're hearing, about the Freedom Caucus and how they're going to change America and all. It's about demonizing people, okay, for political advantage. And we have to stop this. We do. That's me, unifier, not a divider. All right, I've got to wind her up. I want to give a big thanks to my producer, Brett Johnson. Brett, we haven't worked together for a while. It's just lovely to have you back. And to you, my listeners, I hope you've liked this show. It's unorthodox. I'm not all that articulate, whatever, but I'm real, okay? And, by the way, I care about you. I do. All of you. And so, between now and next week I'm going to be live, do me a favor, will you? Will you go out and do something to make the world better? And when somebody says something about demonizing another person, will you do this? Hey, wait. That's what you do. Take care. Bye-bye.